Hello everyone! Today we're going to be talking about Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Most of the videos I've seen on this game thus far have been either about how bad or how good the story is. So it seems like Mankind Divided has been pretty, divisive. Anyways, bad jokes aside, I'm mostly going to avoid the main story, so there should not be too much in the way of spoilers. Anyways, let's get going, shall we? Its side missions are one of Mankind Divided's greatest strengths. Most games have side missions that end up feeling a lot like sort of shallow chore lists, including Human Revolution, which was the game in this series before this one. Now, there are a few things that are great about the Mankind Divided side missions though. For one, your actions and choices within those missions almost always impact the narrative. For instance, going lethal or non-lethal is a choice that's virtually always going to change the outcome of a side mission. This game's main story is impossible to impact by your actions, so being able to change the outcome of some mission, any mission, even if it's just a side mission, is a very welcome change, and it's a very empowering feeling, and one that's mostly missing in games these days. I understand why, of course. The cost of making content on the AAA level is massive, so creating multiple mission outcomes, knowing most players will only ever see one of them, is a hard sell when it comes time for a developer to ask a publisher for money. That's one reason I'm so glad that this game vies for the condensed approach. It makes for an open world and an overall game that's considerably smaller than usual, but not ever underwhelming. The attention to detail is something I think most open world games could probably benefit from. Now, there are aspects I'm less crazy about though. Adam Jensen is the protagonist of both Mankind Divided and its predecessor, Human Revolution. He's about what you expect to see in a modern first-person shooter. He's a gruff, no-nonsense, macho He-Man type. And I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't love it. I wish he was more interesting, but I'm okay with it. What I'm less okay with, though, is the fact that if you make different types of choices in the game's dialogue, Adam Jensen seems more like 4 different characters inhabiting one body than one character expressing different moods, if that makes sense. What I mean is, you're shown one kind of Adam Jensen in the main story, and the cutscenes for the main story. You're shown a different character completely if you choose all the nice guy dialogue answers, a different character entirely if you choose all the super asshole answers, and trust me, it's abundantly clear which answer is which in the dialogue wheel. You know which is the nice guy answer, which is the a-hole answer, and which is somewhere in between. The problem is that if you mix and match these up, and a normal person would, because normal people experience different moods throughout their lives, and if you don't go with the same exact type of answer all the time, you end up with a character that's pretty unbelievably inconsistent and really honestly impossible to relate to. And mind you, I don't have a problem relating to the gruff, manly man characters that most game protagonists are. Like I said, I don't love them, I wish they were deeper, but because of the writing in this game's dialogue choices, Adam Jensen is a lot more Aiden Pierce and a lot less John Marston. But you get the idea, so let's move on to... Mankind Divided is very impressive in how well it manages to balance its deep systems and mechanics. This is the main thing that really sets it apart from most other AAA games, FPS games especially. Over the years, we've kind of seen a trend where the larger the scope of a game, the less polished that game is. And I don't just mean bugs, although that's part of it. I mean major issues of systems not even working with each other. I mean mechanics that were supposed to be complex boiled down to a single button press. There are parts of Mankind Divided that are less balanced than others, but all aspects of the game have had some time spent on balancing them. The game really fosters 2 different approaches. There is the stealth approach, and there is the combat approach. A player that chooses to go the upfront combat route will end up spending a majority of their resources and crafting parts on weapon upgrades and maintaining a sizable on-hand pool of ammunition, as well as buying and finding special ammunition suited to certain jobs, like piercing armor, shorting out drones, or damaging augmented enemies. The breakdown of resources and crafting parts is radically different for stealth though. A stealth player will spend the majority of their crafting parts and resources on keeping the energy pool their augments pull on filled up. There may also be a need to buy non-lethal ammunition at some points if you're not the type to obsessively scrounge like I am, but overall the game provides you with plenty of non-lethal ammunition for the stealth route if that's the route that you choose to go. Between the two, combat is far and away the faster way to complete any given mission, story missions especially, because even early on in the game your weapons absolutely rip through enemies. And as long as you continue to pump a somewhat steady stream of upgrades into those weapons, you will continue to rip through enemies all the way through the game. So if completing the game in record time is your aim, or if you're looking to try and speedrun it or something like that, this is the way to go. The game's other approach, however, is stealth. Stealth is almost certainly the approach that this game was intended and designed for. The non-lethal stealth weapons take only one shot to incapacitate enemies most times, but both stun and tranquilizer weapons carry with them different consequences. Tranquilizer ammo, on top of being very hard to come by early in the game, does not incapacitate a foe instantly unless they are shot directly in the head or face. This can be surprisingly difficult to pull off if enemies happen to be wearing helmets. What's the big deal about them not getting incapacitated instantly, you ask? Well, even if they did not see you, they may continue walking in a direction you did not plan for, meaning that when the enemy does eventually pass out, they may do so in front of another enemy, alerting them to your presence, and that's just not good. Stun weapons, on the other hand, are always an instant incapacitation. Only problem is, when you shoot an enemy with a stun weapon, they make a scene, like having a seizure while on shrooms while at a Fish concert level of scene. This means that in order to use stun weapons safely or effectively, you have to isolate the intended target, either by waiting for them to do it themselves on their patrol path, or by using distractions and thrown objects to lure them. The other obstacle in stealth, whether you decide to go lethal or non-lethal, are the bodies of enemies that are left behind. This requires some forward planning, because you will need to move them without being seen, and need to place them somewhere where they will either never be found, or at least not be found right away. The universal between both approaches, though, is that they both require you to use cover. The cover system is a major defining factor in how the gameplay flows between the two standard approaches to playing this game. The beauty of this is the elegant placement of cover to serve both of its possible functions. In a combat situation, cover is used exactly how you would expect. You'll find yourself popping up to take down enemies in the same sort of whack-a-mole way you would in most cover shooters, or use your augments to draw the AI into a disadvantageous position, all using cover as the fulcrum for this leverage. The limited vulnerability it affords helps you as the player avoid damage just enough to develop the engagement in a way that best fits you. That is what the use of cover with the combat system is all about, avoiding damage, whereas the use of cover in a stealth engagement is all about avoiding detection. The cover is placed strategically so that there is almost always more than one way through an area without being seen. Some ways are riskier than others, of course, but that's really up to you. The cover really serves as your lifeline when you're playing stealth. It's best used when you need to conserve energy or are just low on it to begin with. The real impressive thing about this cover system, though, is how well the level design facilitates it. I have played a metric ton of third-person shooter games that use a similar system. I mean, pretty much every third-person shooter since the first Gears of War has had a cover system. The difference is that most games don't do this cover system half as well as Mankind Divided. It's so blatantly obvious what is meant to be cover in most games that a discerning gamer can pick out a spot meant to be used as cover from a literal mile away. And while there are exceptions, in this game, most of the time, I was able to see the cover I was using for what it was meant to represent in the game's world. A wall, a shelf, a windowsill, a bookcase, and not just a chest-high barrier placed by a designer who couldn't come up with an immersive way for their world and their mechanics to meet. But on the topic of mechanics, it's kind of become a trend in the last few years for in-your-face combat and visceral action to be the way the game empowers the player. This is an easy solution, but not the most effective by a long shot, honestly. What is it that makes a player feel empowered? In short, I think it's the ability to choose how any given event plays out. The strength of visceral, supercharged combat is that it allows the player to choose how to dispatch each enemy. Do I melee this guy? Do I shoot him? Do I use some sort of secondary mechanic? And there's some other variations within these choices, of course, but the ultimate outcome is going to be the same. By choosing to just go the combat route, to go with the in-your-face, guns-blazing way of doing things, you're choosing the less empowering way to handle conflict and limiting your options. Now, I'm not saying I think over-the-top action should go with the way of the dodo. I love the new Doom, I love the new Wolfenstein, I love Saints Row 4, and I'm just a sucker for good visceral action. But like I said, it's not the most effective way to empower the player. When it's done well, the more effective way, I think, is stealth. And I know what you're thinking, but ugh, the reason you need to be quiet and sneak around is because you're less powerful. But bear with me here, I'm about to explain. When you're playing a game with a good stealth system, you're faced with so many more choices, more options, more opportunities than just straight combat allows. Meaningful choices. Do I dispatch this enemy? Do I distract him and slip past? Do I wait patiently and find an opening? If I'm going to dispatch them, how and where do I do it? The list goes on depending on the game, but I think you get the idea. Stealth has the potential to be much more empowering than combat. Not because it makes you as a player invulnerable, but because it lets you use your intelligence and your creativity to overcome that invulnerability, instead of just being about reflexes and skill. Stealth is about creating moments where your intelligence and creativity interface with your skill, allowing you to tailor a solution to a given problem specific to you, an expression of you as the player. Deus Ex as a series has an abundance of these moments, and Mankind Divided continues that tradition, as well as improving on that formula massively, where Human Revolution really dropped the ball. And speaking of things that are better in this iteration than Human Revolution, now, we talked a little about the game's level design when we discussed the cover system, but what's more impressive is how the game's level design factors into the world that the game takes place in. Most open world games strive to create the biggest open world they possibly can. The focus in the last 10 years or so has been on creating the biggest worlds possible, but this usually causes the game itself to suffer for a number of reasons. For one, when you're spending all of your effort on expanding your map out, you don't have the time or effort to put the details and care that make up what is in that map. An open world should first and foremost serve the gameplay of the given game it is in. In a game like Grand Theft Auto, a larger map, even if it's more empty, blander, serves the type of game that it is. It's a big, broad sandbox, but a world that size would not serve Mankind Divided's gameplay. Mankind Divided serves its gameplay by creating a world map that is only the size of about a few city blocks, honestly. But every one of those blocks is packed with stores and apartments to visit, secrets to find, hidden entrances, and city infrastructure. It just generally has what you would expect to find in a game world like this. I mean, how many times have you excitedly started up a new game that's being sold as some big open world, only to find that every damn building in this open world is closed? That's a huge pet peeve of mine, so any game that doesn't do that is honestly bound to score some brownie points with me, but this adds value that really can't be overstated. This really assists in giving the illusion of a living world, and this game is one of the best examples of that in recent memory. This is a design methodology that's exemplified really well in the second 3D Zelda game, Majora's Mask. The relative design similarities between the two are so striking that it's pretty plain to see the influence of Majora's Mask on Mankind Divided's overworld. You have the main city of Clocktown, which is a small but densely packed area split into 5 or 6 sizable sections. Each one is packed with shops, puzzles, side quests, and NPCs just going about their daily business. Mankind Divided trades in much the same stock as far as its world building goes, though a majority of the NPCs in Mankind Divided strike me more as video game NPCs than real people, in stark contrast to Majora's Mask, which is disappointing, but understandable considering the scale the developers were working in. It is that living world and the placement of quality side missions in it that make up the real value of the game. But yeah, I've taken enough of your time, so let's wrap this up. So at the end of the day, whether you will enjoy Mankind Divided comes down to a few deciding factors. The main story seems like incredibly implausible gobbledygook to me, but that's the most subjective portion of the game. You may love it. I just dislike when a game goes so heavy-handed with its social commentary, that it is literally beating you over the head with it, beating you to death with it. More like George Romero's Land of the Dead, and less like George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. More like Planet of the Apes, and less like some movie that's more subtle than Planet of the Apes. Underneath Mankind Divided's unattractive facade, though, is an incredibly mechanically sound game. It's a stealth game predominantly, as most of the game's mechanics and systems are obviously there to aid in that style of play. But the option to go the other way with it is there, and options count for a lot in my book. In addition, completionists will get the most out of this game, as the side quests offer not only the best stories, but some of the best gameplay situations as well. And all of this is set in a relatively small, though incredibly dense and believable world. If the main campaign story is something that's usually really important to you, if you play games more for their narratives than their mechanics, then you may want to stay away. If you just dislike stealth games, which is totally valid, you may also want to stay away. If you're looking for a game that does not require you to invest significant time into its systems just to get comfortable, you may yet also want to stay away. But barring those things, or some other exception I may not have mentioned or considered, this really is a pretty exceptional game. It's been a while since I played a big AAA release like this and came out on the other side feeling like it was a good use of my time. But alas, I guess it had to happen eventually. So really and truly, just thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if this sort of content is something you do enjoy, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm working on delivering at a fairly consistent rate here, but anyways, thank you in advance for sharing any of my content and for subscribing if you enjoy it. It means a lot to me. So I'll see you all on the next one. Thanks again.